I've spent 5 years training 250-pound beasts how to throw a punch without breaking their own wrists, but I've never seen a man suck the oxygen out of a room just by standing in it. He walked into my gym like he owned the floor, the air, and my very soul. Most girls would have bowed, some would have fainted. Me? I dropped a 60-pound sandbag on his expensive Italian leather shoes and told the most powerful alpha in the city to shut his damn mouth. I thought I was being brave. I thought I was being fierce. I didn't realize that to a predator like him, defiance doesn't sound like a no. It sounds like a dinner bell.
Welcome back to Z's Romance, your home for the most intense and captivating fated mate stories. Before we dive into today's premiere, I want to hear from you. Our community spans the entire globe, so head down to the comments right now and let us know, where in the world are you listening from today? I love seeing how far our pack reaches. Now, settle in and get ready. The king is waiting.
Chapter 1. The Sound of a Heartbeat. The rhythmic thuck, thuck, thuck of my shins hitting the heavy bag was the only thing keeping me from screaming. It was 11 p.m., the gym was supposed to be empty, and the humidity was high enough to make my sports bra feel like a second, tighter skin. I was mid-round, sweat stinging my eyes, when the front door didn't just open, it surrendered. The hinges groaned as a wall of pure, unadulterated testosterone stepped into my sanctuary. He wasn't wearing a cape or some ancient armor. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire lease, but the clothes couldn't hide the way his shoulders blocked out the hallway light or the predatory grace in his stride. This was Derek, the Alpha King, the man who supposedly ran the city's shadow economy with a flick of his wrist. He didn't look at the equipment. He didn't look at the ring. He looked at me like I was a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. Behind him, 3 suits, his beta lapdogs, hovered like nervous shadows. "The tribute is short this month," Derek began. His voice wasn't a roar. It was a low, velvet purr that vibrated right through the floorboards and up into my heels. I was told the Iron Pit gym was harboring 3 capable fighters. I see only 1 girl playing with a toy. I stopped my kick mid-swing. I let the heavy bag swing back and forth, the chain rattling in the sudden silence. My heart was thumping, but it wasn't fear. It was pure, localized irritation. "First of all," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with a taped hand, "it's a 60-pound bag, not a toy. Second, the gym is closed. Third, your tribute sounds like a personal problem. Now, if you're done monologuing like a villain in a bad 90s movie, I have 3 more sets to finish." One of the suits stepped forward, his lip curling. "Do you have any idea who—" Derek raised a single hand. The suit went dead silent, instantly. Derek's eyes didn't glow. They didn't turn gold or purple or any other magical nonsense. They just became incredibly focused, intense, dark pupils dilating as he caught my scent across the room. "You have a tongue," Derek remarked, stepping closer. The smell of him hit me then. Sandalwood, rain-drenched earth, and the unmistakable heavy musk of a wolf. No cologne could mask that. Usually, people find it difficult to speak in my presence. Their vocal cords tend to seize up. "Maybe you should try being less annoying," I snapped. I stepped off the mat, closing the distance between us because I refused to let him dictate the space. "Actually, better yet, just shut up. Your voice is giving me a headache, and I'm already having a bad hair day." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a car. The suits looked like they were waiting for the ceiling to collapse. Derek stayed perfectly still. Then a small, dark smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Shut up?" he repeated softly. Before I could blink, the world blurred. There was no magical flash, just raw, terrifying speed. One second I was standing in the center of the gym, the next my back slammed into the cold industrial concrete of the far wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but before I could slide down, 2 massive hands braced against the wall on either side of my head. He was so close, I could feel the heat radiating off his chest like a furnace. He didn't touch me, not yet, but his shadow swallowed me whole. He leaned down, his nose hovering just an inch from the pulse point in my neck. I could hear it, not just my heart, but his, a deep, heavy thud-thud that seemed to sync up with mine. His breath was hot against my skin, sending a traitorous electric shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with combat. "I can smell it,"
Derek whispered, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. And now that I'm silent, I can hear everything your body is saying. Your heart is racing, Rhea, and it's not because you're angry. He shifted his weight, his thigh sliding between mine, pinning me firmly against the stone. I tried to bring my hands up to shove him, but he caught both my wrists in one hand, pinning them above my head with effortless strength. He didn't look like a king then. He looked like a wolf who had finally found the only thing in the world worth hunting. I can smell it, he growled, his voice dropping an octave, becoming something primal and hungry. The way your chemistry just changed. You've spent your whole life fighting the world, but you can't fight biology. He leaned in closer, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of my throat, and for the first time in my life, I forgot how to breathe.
Chapter 2. The Contract of the Claw. His teeth were a promise, not a threat. The graze against my throat was cold and sharp, yet it sent a molten heat through my veins that made my knees buckle. I hated it. I hated the way my pulse jumped to meet his rhythm, and I hated that despite my years of training, I was trapped between a slab of concrete and 200 pounds of alpha-grade muscle. I didn't struggle. To struggle was to show him he had a grip on my mind, not just my wrists. I stared straight into his dark, dilated pupils. There was no magic in them, just the terrifying intensity of a predator who had found a scent he couldn't ignore. "Get your teeth off of me," I rasped, my voice steadier than I felt, "or I'll show you exactly how many ways a human can break a shifter's nose." Derek let out a low, vibrating chuckle against my skin. He didn't pull away immediately. He took a long, deep breath, inhaling my scent as if he were memorizing it. When he finally retreated, he didn't go far. He stepped back just enough to let me breathe, though his hand remained clamped around my wrists above my head. "You're a liar, Rhea," Derek murmured. "Your mouth says get off, but your scent is screaming finally." "It's called adrenaline," I snapped, my eyes flashing. "Now most people get it when they're being harassed by a delusional billionaire. Now let me go before I decide to sue you for everything that suit is worth." Derek finally released my wrists. The blood rushed back into my hands, tingling like 1,000 needles. I immediately stepped out of his personal space, putting the heavy bag between us like a shield. I felt exposed, my skin still buzzing where he had touched me. One of his suits cleared his throat, looking terrified. "Sir, the council meeting starts in 20 minutes. We need to finalize the recruit list." Derek didn't even turn around. His focus was locked on me, his gaze tracing the lines of my body with a clinical, possessive interest. "The list is revised," Derek said, his voice cutting through the air. "I don't want the pack brawlers. I want her." I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. "I'm not a recruit, Derek. I'm a business owner. I don't work for your little club." "You do when you're 3 months behind on your safety taxes," Derek said, his tone shifting from predatory to cold and calculated. He pulled a slim tablet from the inner pocket of his jacket and tossed it onto the gym mat. It slid to a stop at my feet. "This gym is built on pack territory. You haven't paid the local alpha, which means the debt defaulted to me. I own this building, Rhea. I own the equipment, and right now, I'm the only reason the city hasn't bulldozed this place into a parking lot." My stomach dropped. I knew the safety tax was a thing, but I'd been paying the local guy under the table for years. "I paid Marcus," I said, my voice rising. "Marcus is dead," Derek replied simply, "and he was skimming. The debt stands at 300,000. You have 48 hours to pay, or my crews come in to clear the floor." He started to walk toward the door, the suits parting for him like the Red Sea. He stopped at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. "Or," he said, his eyes raking over me one last time, "or you can work off the debt, train my elite guard, teach them how to fight with the desperation of a human. You start tomorrow at dawn. My compound. Don't be late, Rhea. I'm not a patient man when it comes to my property." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the humid silence of the gym. My hands were shaking, and for the first time, it wasn't from the workout. It was the realization that I had just been claimed, not by a bond, but by a contract I couldn't break. Chapter 3. The Lion's Den. The Alpha King's compound didn't look like a castle. It looked like a fortress made of glass, steel, and secrets. It sat at the edge of the city, overlooking the river, a monument to the power he wielded. I pulled my beat-up motorcycle into the driveway, the engine's roar feeling like a defiant middle finger to the silent, sleek SUVs parked in the lot. I was wearing my toughest combat gear, cargo pants, steel-toed boots, and a tank top that showed off the ink on my arms. If Derek wanted a trainer, he was getting the one who broke ribs, not the one who played nice. Two guards met me at the door. They were huge, their suits straining against chests that were clearly not human. They didn't speak. They just scanned me and led me toward the basement level. We passed a glass-walled boardroom where men in suits sat like vultures, but we kept going down until the scent of expensive leather was replaced by the familiar sharp tang of sweat and iron. The training floor was massive. In the center, a group of 6 men were sparring. They were fast, supernaturally fast, but they were sloppy. They relied on their strength to overwhelm, not technique. And then there was Derek. He wasn't in a suit today. He was wearing black athletic pants and nothing else. His back was to me, a roadmap of muscle and old, faint scars that told stories of fights that hadn't been won with words. He was hitting a heavy bag, each strike sounding like a gunshot in the cavernous room. "You're 4 minutes late," he said without turning around. "I had to find a parking spot that wouldn't get my bike pregnant from all the luxury cars," I said, dropping my duffel bag. Derek stopped. He grabbed the bag to still it and turned around. Sweat glistened on his skin, carving out the deep lines of his abs. He looked less like a businessman now and entirely like a predator. "These are my elite," Derek said, gesturing to the 6 men who had stopped sparring to stare at me with varying degrees of amusement. "They protect the borders. They protect me. They think they're invincible because they can shift. They look like they'd trip over their own paws if someone moved the furniture," I said, loud enough for them to hear. The biggest one, a guy with a buzz cut and a sneer, stepped forward. "You brought a human to teach us? Is she the morning snack, Derek?" The other men chuckled. Derek didn't. He just leaned against the heavy bag, crossing his arms over his chest. "Rhea, this is Eugene. He's the fastest in the pack. Eugene, show her why we don't need tactics." Eugene didn't wait. He lunged. He was a blur of movement, aiming for a heavy-handed grab that would have pinned a normal woman instantly. But I wasn't normal. I'd spent my life studying the center of gravity on things 3 times my size. I dropped low, letting his momentum carry me over me, and planted my heel firmly into the back of his knee. As he stumbled, I drove my elbow into the soft spot beneath his ribs. He let out a wheeze, crashing into the mats. Before he could roll, I had my knee in the small of his back and his arm twisted into a lock that would snap his shoulder if he breathed wrong. "Speed is useless if you don't know where you're going, puppy," I whispered into his ear. The room went silent. The other guards stopped laughing. I looked up, expecting Derek to be angry. Instead, he was watching me with an expression that made the air in the room feel 10 degrees hotter. It wasn't pride, it was hunger. "Again," Derek commanded, his voice a low growl. "And this time, Eugene, try not to let the girl embarrass you." Eugene snarled, his eyes darkening. He scrambled up, his pride clearly wounded. But as he lunged again, the front doors of the gym burst open. A man drenched in blood staggered in, his breathing ragged. "Derek," the man gasped. "The North Pack. They didn't wait for the meeting. They're at the docks. They have the shipment." Derek's entire demeanor changed. The air became heavy, thick with the scent of an alpha ready for war. He didn't look at the messenger. He looked at me. "Training is over," Derek said, grabbing a shirt from a nearby bench. "You wanted to see me in action, Rhea? Grab your gear. You're coming with us." Chapter 4. The Scent of Rain and Steel. "I'm security, not a soldier," I said, following Derek through the underground garage as he climbed into a matte black SUV. My contract said training, not dockside brawling. "Your contract says you belong to me for 30 days. Derek snapped, his voice tight with an edge I hadn't heard before. He slid into the driver's seat and looked at me, his gaze burning. "Get in, Rhea, or I'll put you in." I climbed in.
I wasn't afraid of the fight, but I was afraid of the way my body reacted every time he used that tone. It was a primal, magnetic pull that made me want to either punch him or pull him closer. The drive to the docks was a blur of high-speed turns and tense silence. Derek drove like he fought, with a terrifying, controlled aggression. Behind us, 2 more SUVs followed, filled with his elite guards. "The North Pack isn't like mine," Derek said, his hands gripping the leather so hard the leather groaned. "They're old school. They don't believe in businesses or glass buildings. They believe in the blood of the hunt. They'll try to bait my men into shifting early. If they shift in the open, the city police have an excuse to move in. We keep this human. We keep this quiet." "So you want me to be the equalizer, a human who can take down a wolf without making a scene?" "I want you to stay alive," Derek muttered, so low I almost didn't hear him. We arrived at the docks as a heavy rain began to fall, turning the concrete into a slick black mirror. The air was thick with the smell of salt water, rust, and something else, the wild, pungent scent of a rival pack.
Derek led the way, his movements silent and fluid despite his size. We moved between stacks of shipping containers until we reached an open yard. There, under the flickering amber lights of the pier, stood a dozen men. They were dressed in rugged flannels and heavy boots, looking like they'd just stepped out of a forest. The leader of the North Pack, a man with a scarred face and a wild mane of gray hair, stepped forward. He didn't look at Derek. He looked at me, his nose wrinkling in disgust. "You bring a human female to a parley, Derek? Have you gone soft in your tower? She's more dangerous than any 3 of your pups, Frank. Give me back the shipment and we walk away. No blood, no paperwork." Frank laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. "I think I will keep the shipment, and maybe I'll keep the girl too. She smells intriguing." In an instant, the atmosphere turned lethal. Derek didn't roar, he didn't shift. He simply stepped in front of me, his shadow falling over me like a shield. The air around him seemed to vibrate with a physical pressure, the sheer weight of his dominance. "Touch her," Derek whispered, the sound carrying clearly through the rain. "I will tear your heart out with my bare hands before you can even think about shifting." Frank whistled, and his men began to circle us. My guards moved into a defensive formation, but I could see the tension in their shoulders. They were itching to shift, to let the beast out. "Don't," I whispered to Eugene, who was standing nearest me. "Stay human. Use your weight." One of the North Pack members lunged at me, thinking I was the weak link. I didn't wait for Derek to intervene. I stepped into the man's reach, grabbed his collar, and used his own momentum to flip him over my shoulder and onto the rain-slicked concrete. The sound of his breath leaving his body was the starting gun. The yard erupted. It wasn't a magical battle. It was a gritty, visceral riot. I was a whirlwind of elbows and knees, staying low and moving fast. Derek was a force of nature, his fists landing with the force of sledgehammers. In the chaos, I found myself separated from the group, backed against a rusted shipping container by 2 of Frank's men. They were grinning, their teeth looking too long for their mouths. Just as they moved in, a hand grabbed my waist and yanked me backward. I hit Derek's chest, his arm wrapping around me like an iron band. He pulled me into the dark gap between 2 containers, his body shielding me from the rain. "Rhea," he panted, his face inches from mine. His eyes were dark, his pupils completely swallowing the iris. He wasn't looking at the fight. He was looking at me. "You're bleeding." I hadn't even felt the scratch on my cheek. He leaned in, his tongue darting out to lick the drop of blood from my skin. The contact was like a lightning bolt. "Derek, the fight!" "Let them fight," he growled, his hand sliding up to cup the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my wet hair. He crushed his lips to mine, and the world outside the container, the rain, the shouting, the blood, simply ceased to exist. Chapter 5. The Hunger in the Dark. The kiss was a collision of teeth and desperation. It tasted like rain, salt, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Derek didn't kiss like a man who wanted to be loved. He kissed like a man who was starving and had finally found the only thing that could sustain him. His hand was a vice at the back of my head, holding me still as he devoured me. His other arm cinched around my waist so tightly, I felt the hard line of his belt buckle digging into my stomach. I should have pushed him away. I should have reminded him that we were in the middle of a literal war zone with sirens wailing in the distance. Instead, my hands found the wet cotton of his shirt, bunching the fabric as I pulled him closer. My body was betraying every principle I'd ever held. The mate pheromones were a thick, invisible fog, turning my blood into liquid fire. "Derek," I gasped, breaking the kiss for a fraction of a second. My chest was heaving against his. "The cops, the sirens." "Let them come," he growled, his voice a low, vibrating rumble against my lips. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his breath scalding my cold, wet skin. "I don't belong to anyone," I managed to say, though my voice lacked its usual bite. He pulled back just enough to look at me. His pupils were so blown out that they had nearly erased the dark brown of his irises. He looked feral, stripped of the corporate king persona. He reached up, his thumb grazing the cut on my cheek where he'd licked away the blood. The touch was unnervingly tender compared to the violence of the kiss. "Keep telling yourself that, Rhea, but your heart is drumming a rhythm that only beats for one person, and you know exactly who it is." The sound of tires screeching on wet pavement broke the spell. Blue and red lights began to dance against the rusted metal of the shipping containers. Derek stiffened, his professional mask sliding back into place with a speed that made my head spin. He let go of me, though the heat of his body lingered like a brand. "Eugene!" Derek shouted, his voice cutting through the rain. "Clear the yard. Get the trucks moving. We leave through the south gate." Eugene and the rest of the elite appeared from the shadows, looking battered but victorious. They didn't say a word about me being tucked away in a corner with their boss, but the knowing looks they exchanged made my face burn. Derek grabbed my hand, his fingers interlaced with mine. His grip was possessive, undeniable. He led me toward the SUV, throwing me into the passenger seat before rounding the hood. As he pulled away from the docks, the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded in the rearview mirror, but the tension inside the car was only tightening. "Where are we going?" I asked, watching the city lights blur past. "That's not the way to my gym." "You aren't going back to the gym tonight," Derek said, his eyes fixed on the road. "Frank saw your face. He smelled your connection to me. If you go home, you're a target. You're staying at the compound." "The hell I am," I snapped, reaching for the door handle. "I have a life, Derek. I have a business to run. You can't just kidnap me because some overgrown puppy looked at me funny." Derek hit the central locks. The thud of the deadbolts echoed in the small space. "I'm not kidnapping you, Rhea," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous velvet register. "I'm protecting my investment, and until I know every member of the North Pack is accounted for, you don't leave my sight. Not for a second." Chapter 6. The Gilded Cage. The compound was different at night. The glass walls reflected the moon, making the whole structure look like a monolith carved from shadow. Derek didn't lead me to the training floor this time. We went up. The elevator ascended silently to the penthouse level, his private quarters. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a space that was entirely too large and too quiet. It was all dark wood, leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sleeping city. It was beautiful, but it felt like a cage designed by an architect. "There's clothes in the guest suite," Derek shedding his wet jacket and tossing it on a chair. He started unbuttoning his shirt, his movements casual, as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Shower, get warm. I'll have food brought up." "I don't want your food, and I don't want your guest suite," I said, standing my ground in the center of the living room. "I want my bike, and I want my autonomy back." Derek stopped unbuttoning his shirt. It hung open, revealing the damp, hard planes of his chest and the dark hair that trailed down into his trousers. He walked toward me, his footsteps silent on the hardwood. I refused to back up. I refused to let him see that my breath hitched every time he got within 3 feet of me. "Your bike is being picked up by my team. It'll be in the garage by morning," he said, stopping just inches away. He smelled like wood smoke and rain. "And as for your autonomy, you lost that the moment you told me to shut up in front of my men. You issued a challenge, Rhea. In my world, a challenge results in a win or a loss. You haven't lost yet, but you're currently in overtime." "Is that all this is to you?" I challenged, gesturing between us. "A game of dominance? A territorial dispute?" Derek reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, tilting my head up so I had no choice but to look into his eyes. The intensity there was staggering. It wasn't just lust, it was a deep, ancient recognition that defied logic. "It's biology," he whispered. "It's the reason I can't breathe when you're in the other room. It's the reason my wolf wants to tear the throat out of any man who even looks at you. You think you're fierce because you can fight? Try fighting the fact that you were made for me." He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine, but he didn't kiss me. He was testing me, waiting for me to break. "Go shower, Rhea," his voice a low command, "before I forget that I'm trying to be a gentleman." I turned on my heel and marched toward the guest suite, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The bathroom was larger than my entire kitchen, stocked with plush towels and expensive soaps. I stripped off my wet, blood-stained gear and stepped into the steaming water, trying to scrub the scent of Derek off my skin. It was impossible. He was under my skin now. I dressed in a pair of oversized gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt I found in the drawer. Clearly his. It smelled like him. It felt like him. I looked in the mirror, my hair damp and my eyes wide. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked hunted. I walked back into the living room, ready to demand a phone to call my sister, but the room was empty. A tray of food sat on the coffee table, artisan bread, steak, and a glass of dark wine, but Derek was nowhere to be seen. I walked toward the balcony, the sliding glass door heavy and thick. I stepped out into the cool night air, looking over the railing. The drop was hundreds of feet. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" I jumped, spinning around. Derek was sitting in a dark chair in the corner of the balcony, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was wearing only silk lounge pants, his bare chest bronzed by the moonlight. He looked like a statue of some ancient, forgotten deity. "It's a long way down," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It is," he agreed, standing up and walking toward me. He didn't stop until he was standing right behind me, his chest brushing my back. He leaned over, his arms flanking mine as he gripped the railing, effectively trapping me against his body. "But don't worry, Rhea. I've never been one to let things fall." Suddenly, a low, rumbling growl echoed from the street below. Not a car, not a dog, something much bigger. I leaned over the railing and saw a dark shape moving in the shadows of the compound gates. "They're here," I whispered. Derek's grip on the railing tightened until the metal groaned. "They're early," he growled. "Stay inside, lock the door, do not come out until I tell you." Chapter 7. The Alpha's Threshold. "You are not going down there alone," I said, grabbing Derek's arm as he tried to push me back inside. "This isn't a sparring match in your gym, Rhea," he snapped, his voice vibrating with a raw, guttural edge. His muscles were corded, his body vibrating with the effort of holding back the shift. "This is a territorial breach. Frank has brought his enforcers. They aren't here to talk." "I don't care," I said, my grip tightening on his bicep. "You said I was your investment. Well, I don't let my investments get shredded because they're too proud to accept help. I know how they move, Derek. I saw them at the docks." Derek looked at me, and for a second, the beast was right there behind his eyes. He looked ready to toss me over his shoulder and lock me in a closet. But then he saw the look in my eyes, the same defiance that had started this whole mess. He let out a sharp, frustrated breath. "Fine, but you stay behind me. If I tell you to run, you run. No arguments." We didn't take the elevator. Derek led me to a hidden stairwell that bypassed the main lobby. As we descended, the sounds of the struggle became clearer, the sounds of shattering glass, the heavy thuds of bodies hitting walls, and the terrifying, non-human snarls that made the hair on my arms stand up. We burst into the lobby. It was chaos. 2 of Derek's guards were holding the line against 4 of Frank's men. The North Pack wasn't using guns. They were using their sheer mass, their fingers ending in blunt, thickened nails that acted like claws. Derek didn't hesitate. He waded into the fray like a god of war. He didn't shift fully. He couldn't, not in the middle of a lobby, but his strength was terrifying. He caught a man mid-air and slammed him into the marble floor with enough force to crack the stone. I stayed on the periphery, moving like a shadow.
I saw one of Frank's men circling around to Derek's blind side, a heavy metal decorative bust in his hand. I didn't think. I launched myself off a designer sofa, catching the man mid-swing. I wrapped my legs around his neck and used my weight to bring him down in a sharp, tactical chokehold. He bucked and thrashed, his skin feeling unnaturally hot, but I held on until his eyes rolled back and he went limp.
"Rhea, watch out!" Derek's voice was a roar. I looked up just in time to see Frank himself. He had smashed through the front glass, his face twisted in a mask of pure animalistic rage. He wasn't looking at Derek, he was looking at me. He lunged. I rolled to the left, but he was too fast. His hand caught the back of my shirt, slamming me face first into the reception desk. Stars exploded in my vision. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder as his weight pinned me down. "A pretty little human," Frank hissed, his breath smelling of raw meat. "Let's see how Derek likes it when his mate is returned in pieces." Derek was across the room in a heartbeat. He didn't hit Frank. He tackled him with such force they both went flying through the remaining glass partition, landing in the courtyard fountain. I scrambled to my feet, my head spinning. I ran to the edge of the shattered glass. In the fountain, Derek had Frank pinned under the water, his hands around the older man's throat. Derek's back was heaving, his skin flushing a dark, angry red. He looked like he was seconds away from tearing Frank apart. "Derek, stop!" I screamed. "The police are already on their way. If you kill him here, you lose everything." Derek didn't move. He looked like a statue of vengeance. "Derek, look at me!" Slowly, his head turned. His face was splattered with water and blood, his expression completely unreadable. But as his eyes locked onto mine, the tension in his shoulders seemed to snap. He let go of Frank, who came up sputtering and gasping for air. Derek stood up, the water dripping off his bare chest. He walked toward me, ignoring the moaning men on the floor and the sound of approaching sirens. He stepped through the broken glass and stopped right in front of me. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the bruise forming on my forehead. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm fine," I said, though I was shaking. "We need to go, now." He nodded, but he didn't move. He leaned in, his forehead pressing against mine, his scent overwhelming everything else. "I'm moving you," he said, his voice flat and final. "What? To another room?" "No," Derek said, looking toward the dark woods at the edge of the property. "To the mountain. The city isn't safe anymore. We leave tonight." Before I could protest, he swept me up into his arms. I looked back at the lobby, the wreckage of my life, the blood on the marble, and realized that the "shut up" I'd yelled in the gym had been the last word I'd ever say as a free woman. Chapter 8. The Ascent of Shadows. The city lights faded into a jagged line of glowing embers behind us as Derek's SUV tore through the winding mountain roads. He drove with a silent, terrifying focus, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, my head still throbbing from the impact at the lobby. I wasn't tied up, I wasn't cuffed, but with the child locks engaged and the sheer speed we were traveling, I might as well have been in a cage. "You can't just disappear, Derek," I said, my voice sounding small against the roar of the engine. "The police, the media, you're the alpha king of this city. People notice when the king burns his palace down and flees into the woods." "I didn't burn it down," he growled, his voice still carrying that low guttural vibration from the fight. "I secured it. My legal team will handle the vandalism from Frank's pack, but Frank won't stop. He's tasted blood, Rhea. Your blood, and until I have you behind the perimeter of the mountain sanctuary, I can't guarantee your heart stays inside your chest." "I'm a trainer, Derek. I've dealt with psychos before." "Not like this," he snapped, casting a brief, burning look at me. "Frank is old guard. He doesn't want your gym or my money. He wants to break me by taking the only thing that has ever made me hesitate. He knows I've found my match. He knows you're the crack in my armor." I looked out the window at the towering pines. There was no magic here, no glowing eyes in the dark, just the raw, oppressive weight of nature.
I felt a strange prickle on the back of my neck. It wasn't fear of Frank, it was the way Derek was looking at me, like I was the most precious and most dangerous thing he'd ever touched. The road ended abruptly at a massive iron gate forged into the side of a granite cliff. Derek didn't use a remote. He stepped out of the car, and I watched as the two guards at the gate, men twice the size of Eugene, bowed their heads. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The scent of Derek's dominance was enough to clear the path. He got back in and drove us through. The air changed instantly. It was colder, sharper, smelling of pine and wet stone. The sanctuary wasn't a cabin. It was a sprawling, brutalist lodge built into the mountain itself. Derek parked and walked around to my side, opening the door before I could touch the handle. He didn't offer a hand. He simply stood there, his presence an ultimatum. "Welcome home, Rhea," he said. "This isn't my home. This is a fortress," I countered, stepping out. "In my world, they're the same thing." He led me inside, but as we crossed the threshold, a low, mournful howl echoed from the peaks above. It wasn't a wolf, it was a warning. Derek stiffened, his hand dropping to the small of my back, his fingers splaying wide, as if to shield me. "Eugene," Derek called out to the shadow following us, "tell the scouts, if anything moves on the lower trail, they don't wait for my command, they end it." Derek turned to me, his eyes dark with a sudden, sharp intensity. "We need to get you inside. Your scent, it's changing. The stress is making the bond flare, and every wolf within 5 miles can smell that you're unclaimed."
Chapter 9. The Primal Fever. The interior of the lodge was a maze of heated stone floors and heavy wool rugs. Derek didn't take me to a guest room this time. He took me to his inner sanctum, a room at the very top of the structure, with a view that made the world feel like it was at our feet. The door clicked shut, and for the first time since the gym, we were truly alone. The adrenaline was finally fading, replaced by a heavy, pulsing heat that seemed to radiate from Derek's body. He hadn't put a shirt back on since the fight in the fountain. His skin was dry now, but the scars on his back seemed to pulse with every breath he took. "You're shaking," he observed, his voice dropping to a low hum. "I'm cold," I lied. "You're a bad liar, Rhea." He walked towards me, the sheer mass of him making the room feel small. He stopped inches away, his heat washing over me. "The bond is a physical thing. It's a chemical lock and key. Right now, your body is realizing that the only way to stay safe is to let me in."
"I don't need a lock or a key," I said, my voice trembling. "I need you to stop acting like I'm a puzzle you've already solved." I reached out, intending to push him back, but the moment my palms hit his bare chest, the world tilted. My skin felt like it was being scorched. His heartbeat was a drum against my fingertips, fast and violent. Derek let out a ragged groan, his hands coming up to cover mine, pinning them against his heart. "Do you feel that?" he hissed, his eyes searching mine. "That's not tactics, that's not training. That is the beast in me recognizing the only soul it will ever answer to." He leaned down, his lips brushing my forehead, then my temple, then the corner of my mouth. Every touch was like a spark to dry kindling. I wanted to fight him. I wanted to prove I was still in control. But when his hand slid beneath my shirt, his rough palm grazing the skin of my waist, my head fell back, and a soft, broken sound escaped my throat. "Derek!" "I've spent my whole life being a king," he whispered against my lips, "but with you, I just want to be a man, your man." He picked me up, my legs instinctively wrapping around his waist as he carried me toward the massive, fur-covered bed. He laid me down with a gentleness that was more terrifying than his rage. He hovered over me, his arms braced on either side of my head, his hair falling forward to veil his face. Just as he lowered his head to kiss me, a deafening crash echoed from the floor below. It sounded like a battering ram hitting steel. Derek was off the bed in a heartbeat, his body tensing into a killing machine. He didn't look at the door, he looked at the floor, his head tilting as he listened to the vibrations. "They're not at the gate," he whispered, his face turning pale. "They're in the tunnels." Frank knew about the old mining shafts. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, his eyes locking onto mine with a desperate, raw hunger. Stay under the bed. Don't make a sound. If I don't come back in 10 minutes, take the service elevator to the garage. The keys are in the black truck." "Derek, no!" But he was already gone, the door slamming shut and the lock clicking into place from the outside.
Chapter 10. The Breach of Peace. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. I didn't stay under the bed. I'm Rhea. I don't hide while people fight my battles. I found a heavy glass decanter on the sideboard, thick, weighted crystal, and gripped it by the neck. It wasn't much, but it could crack a skull. I tried the door, locked. I went to the service elevator Derek had mentioned, but as I pressed the button, the power flickered and died. The lodge was plunged into a suffocating pitch-black silence. Then I heard it, the sound of scraping, not from the door, but from the balcony. I turned, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the pale, natural moonlight, I saw a hand grip the stone railing, then another. A man pulled himself up, not Frank, but one of his enforcers. He was drenched in sweat, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his jaw unhinged in a way that looked agonizing. He didn't say a word, he just lunged. I swung the decanter with everything I had. It shattered against his shoulder, the glass biting into his skin, but he didn't even flinch. He slammed me into the wardrobe, his fingers digging into my shoulders like talons. "The alpha wants the heart," he wheezed, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. I drove my knee into his groin and followed up with a palm strike to his chin. He stumbled back, but before I could make a run for the window, the bedroom door exploded off its hinges. Derek was there, but he wasn't the man I had just been lying with. He was mid-shift, his body elongated, his muscles bulging beneath skin that looked like it was being stretched to the breaking point. He didn't have fur yet, but his teeth were full-grown, and his claws were unsheathed. He didn't use a weapon. He hit the enforcer like a freight train, the two of them crashing through the glass balcony door and out into the night. I ran to the edge, my breath hitching in my throat. They were tumbling down the rocky slope below the lodge, a blur of shadow and violence. Derek was winning, but Frank's men were pouring out of the forest like a flood. There were too many of them. I looked around the room, desperate for something, anything to help him. My eyes landed on the fireplace. Not the poker, but the emergency flare kit Derek kept for the scouts. I grabbed it, my fingers fumbling with the seal. I stepped out onto the balcony, the wind whipping my hair across my face. Below me, Derek was surrounded. He was fighting 3 of them at once, his body a map of red gashes. I struck the flare. The red sparks hissed, casting a lurid light over the mountainside. "Derek, up here!" I screamed. He looked up, and for a split second, our eyes met. In that moment, the fierce trainer and the Alpha King were gone. There was only the bond. "Jump!" he roared, his voice a sound that didn't belong to a human. He cleared the path, throwing the shifters aside as he ran back towards the base of the balcony. He reached out his arms, his claws retracting just enough to catch me. "Trust me, Rhea." I didn't think. I climbed over the railing and let go, falling into the dark, cold air. Chapter 11. The Fall and the Embrace. The fall was short, but brutal. I hit Derek's arms with a sickening jolt, the impact stealing my breath. His partial shift was a blessing and a curse. His skin was hard as granite, his grip like steel, but the friction of his furred arms against my exposed skin was jarring. He grunted, the sound a low, animalistic protest, as we tumbled down the steep, rocky incline away from the lodge. We didn't roll far. Derek, even in his half-shifted state, had the instinct of a seasoned mountaineer. He dug his claws, still partially extended, into the loose earth, twisting his body to shield mine as we came to a jarring halt against a thick cluster of mountain laurel. Branches snapped, dirt flew, and when we stopped, I was plastered against his chest, every inch of my body screaming in protest. "You're heavy," he rasped, his voice rough. He wasn't fully human. His face was still elongated, his eyes dark and wide, his canines glinting in the faint moonlight. "You told me to jump, you overgrown golden retriever," I retorted, trying to push myself up. My ankle screamed. "My life insurance doesn't cover impromptu cliff dives." He ignored my sarcasm. His hand, still partially clawed, gently gripped my chin, tilting my face to his. His scent, thick with pine and his own musk, was overwhelming. He sniffed once, then twice, his expression grim. "Your scent is tainted," he growled. "One of Frank's men scratched you, on the shoulder." I hadn't even noticed the pain from my shoulder until he mentioned it. Now a dull throb pulsed where Frank's enforcer had dug his talons in. It was superficial, but Derek's attention to it was intense. He shifted, pulling my jacket down just enough to expose the small, bleeding scratch. He lowered his head without a word, his breath warm on my skin. Then his tongue darted out, licking the wound clean. The sensation was primal, intimate, and utterly disorienting. I gasped, my fingers digging into the hard muscles of his shoulders. "What are you doing?" I choked out. "Cleaning it," his tongue rasping against my skin. "Their claws carry a weak paralytic. It dulls their prey. Nothing serious for you, but it will make you sluggish." He finished, and when he pulled back, his eyes were still on the wound, then on mine. There was a raw, possessive heat in them that made my stomach clench. "We need to move," he said, his voice regaining some of his human cadence, though his facial features were still subtly altered. "The mountain isn't empty. Frank has trackers out. They'll follow the scent. My ankle is probably sprained, and you're still half wolf, not exactly blending in for a quick hike through the forest." Derek didn't argue. He simply bent down, scooped me up into his arms, and cradled me against his chest, as if I weighed nothing. My head rested against his shoulder, and I could feel the powerful thrum of his heartbeat beneath my ear. His scent enveloped me completely. "Hold on," he commanded, his voice a low growl. He started to move, not walking, but leaping through the dense undergrowth with an almost impossible speed and agility. The trees blurred past us. I buried my face against his neck, the primal rhythm of his movements lulling me into a strange, uneasy sense of security. The sounds of the fight at the lodge faded behind us, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant, mournful cries of real wolves, wild, untamed. We were truly alone now, deep in the heart of his territory, with nothing but the forest, his beast, and the growing, undeniable pull between us.
Chapter 12. The Den of Secrets. Derek moved for what felt like hours, his breathing deep and even despite the speed. The world became a blur of dark trees and the rhythmic thump of his heart against my ear. My ankle throbbed, but the pain was distant, dulled by the exhaustion and the overwhelming presence of the man carrying me. He finally slowed as we approached a concealed entrance, a massive iron-reinforced door built into the side of a sheer rock face, almost invisible amidst the dense foliage and moss. He nudged a hidden panel with his elbow, and the door hissed open, revealing a dark, cold tunnel. "This way," he grunted, his voice back to his normal pitch, though his features were still sharp, his eyes still holding that primal glint. He carried me through the tunnel, which sloped steeply downwards. The air grew colder, heavier, smelling of damp earth and something metallic. After a few turns, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space carved deep within the mountain. It wasn't raw rock, it was clearly engineered, with reinforced walls and low, utilitarian lighting. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice echoing. "One of the old mining tunnels," Derek said, finally setting me down on a rough-hewn wooden bench. My ankles screamed as I put weight on it, but I managed to stay upright. "Refurbished. This is where we retreat when the city gets too hot. It's impenetrable. No one knows about this entrance but me and a few trusted beta." He gestured to a series of alcoves and rooms branching off the main cavern. There were cots, medical supplies, and even a small, self-contained kitchen area. It was sparse, practical, and utterly devoid of anything personal. "We'll be safe here," he stated, his eyes sweeping the cavern, checking for any anomalies. "Safe or trapped?" I countered, limping over to a table where a medical kit lay open. I picked up a roll of bandage. "You dragged me out here, away from my home, away from everything. I'm not a hostage, Derek." "You are my responsibility," he corrected, his voice firm. He walked over to me, his presence looming. "And when I give my word, I protect. No one is getting through these tunnels, and if they do, they'll regret it."
He took the bandage from my hand and gently pushed me onto the bench. His knee knelt before me, his eyes focused on my injured ankle. His touch was unexpectedly careful as he probed the swelling.
"It's not broken," he confirmed, his thumb running along the bruised skin. "Just a nasty sprain, needs to be iced and wrapped." He didn't ask for permission. He simply went about tending to my injury, his large, rough hands surprisingly adept. The intimacy of his touch in that stark, cold cavern was disarming. I watched the top of his head, the dark hair falling across his forehead, and felt that unsettling blend of irritation and raw attraction thrumming through me. "You're very domesticated when you're not throwing people off balconies," I commented, trying to lighten the mood. He glanced up, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips. "I have my moments, but don't mistake competence for softness, Rhea. This mountain is my territory, and everything in it, including you, falls under my protection." He finished wrapping my ankle, securing it tightly. Then he stood, pulling a small, battered silver flask from his pocket. He uncorked it, a sharp, potent smell of whiskey filling the air.
"Drink," he ordered, holding it out to me, "for the pain." I hesitated. I don't usually drink on the job. "You're off the clock," Derek said, his eyes locking onto mine, daring me to refuse. "And believe me, you'll need it. The mountain air tends to make the bond difficult to ignore." I took the flask, the cold metal a stark contrast to the burning heat his touch had left on my skin. I took a long swallow of the fiery liquid. It burned its way down my throat, but the warmth began to spread through my limbs, dulling the ache in my ankle and the frantic beating of my heart. Derek watched me, his expression unreadable. Then he took the flask back, his fingers brushing mine. He didn't drink, he just capped it and placed it on the table. "Get some rest, Rhea," he said, his voice softer now. He gestured to a cot in an alcove. "I'll take the first watch." I nodded, too tired to argue. I hobbled over to the cot and collapsed onto the rough blankets. As I lay there, listening to the heavy silence of the mountain, I realized I was truly isolated. No phone, no city, just Derek and the unsettling knowledge that I was trapped in his den. I closed my eyes, but the last thing I saw was Derek's silhouette, standing guard by the tunnel entrance, his back a wall of unwavering, terrifying protection.
Chapter 13. The Pheromone Storm. Sleep in the mountain den was a restless, fitful thing. Every rustle of the leaves outside, every creak of the ancient rock set my nerves on edge. But it wasn't the sounds that truly kept me awake. It was Derek's scent. It was everywhere, on the blankets, in the air, a constant, heavy presence that made my skin prickle and my muscles ache with a strange, deep longing. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat despite the cavern's chill. My ankle throbbed, but it was the least of my concerns. My body was on fire, a feverish heat radiating from my core. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name, but knew instinctively was linked to Derek. He was sitting across the cavern, sharpening a heavy hunting knife with a methodical, almost ritualistic rhythm. He looked up the moment I stirred, his eyes piercing through the dim light. "You're an estrus," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet his gaze held a simmering intensity that made my breath catch.
My cheeks flamed. "I am not an estrus, Derek. I have a fever, and if you ever use that word around me again, I will personally neuter you with that knife." He chuckled, a low, dark sound that vibrated through the stone floor. "Humans call it a heat cycle. Wolves call it estrus. It's biology, Rhea, and it's amplified by the bond. Your body is screaming for what it needs." He stood, the knife clinking softly as he set it on the table. He started walking toward me, slowly, deliberately, like a predator circling its prey. Every step intensified the heat blooming in my stomach, making my head spin. My hands clenched into fists, but it wasn't anger, it was a desperate attempt to gain control over my own body. "And what does my body need, Derek?" I challenged, my voice breathier than I intended. He stopped at the edge of my cot, his silhouette framed by the faint light. His scent, which had been merely present before, now exploded around me, intoxicating and overwhelming. It was pure, raw male, animalistic, dominant, irresistible.
It needs me, he growled, his voice a low primal rasp that bypassed my ears and went straight to my core. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from my face. Your pheromones are a storm. Every wolf within miles can feel it, and you know who the storm is calling. My breath hitched. My entire body felt heavy, languid, yet intensely aware of every inch of his proximity. I could feel the heat radiating off him, his musky tang of his desire mingling with my own. It was a chemical reaction, pure and undeniable. "This is not fair," I whispered, my eyes burning. "You're using... I'm not thinking straight." "You're thinking with your blood, Rhea," he countered, his eyes dark with an unmasked hunger. He lowered his hand, his thumb brushing my bottom lip. The contact sent a jolt through me that made my entire body arch subtly toward him. He leaned in, his scent overpowering, making my head swim. His lips were inches from mine, his breath warm and heavy. I could feel the tremor in his body, the effort it took him to hold back. "Tell me to stop," he breathed, his voice ragged. "And I will, but your body will regret it." I stared into his eyes, lost in the dark depths of them. Every instinct I had, every ounce of rational thought, was screaming at me to push him away. But my body, hot and heavy and aching, pulsed with a desperate, ancient longing. My hand, without conscious thought, reached up, my fingers brushing against the stubble on his jaw. "Derek!" A sudden sharp clang echoed from the tunnel entrance, not the main door, but deeper, further in. It was the sound of metal scraping against stone, a forced breach. Derek froze, his face hardening instantly. The hunger in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, lethal alertness. He pulled back from me as if burned, his hand dropping to the heavy knife on the table. "Frank," he growled, his gaze fixed on the tunnel. He found the secondary access. He turned back to me, his face grim. "The mountain isn't as safe as I thought. You need to get out of here, now. Go deeper into the caves. There's a hidden exit, a narrow crevice behind the old supply room. You can squeeze through. It leads to the northern slopes, far from here." "I'm not leaving you," I said, already trying to push myself off the cot, ignoring the pain in my ankle. "You are," he commanded, his voice raw with urgency. "You're my weakness right now. The heat is too strong. I can't fight them and protect you without losing control. Go, Rhea. That's an order." He didn't wait for my answer. He grabbed the knife, his body already moving toward the tunnel entrance, transforming with a speed that made my stomach churn. The sound of his shifting, the stretching of bone, the tearing of muscle, was far more terrifying than any growl. I watched him go, knowing that if I stayed, my presence might be the death of him.
Chapter 14. The Unseen Path. The clang of metal on stone, followed by a guttural roar that was undeniably Derek, spurred me into motion. My ankle screamed in protest, but I ignored it. He was shifting, truly shifting, and the sound alone was enough to tell me the battle behind me was savage. I hobbled toward the old supply room, the scent of dust and stale earth filling my nostrils. The crevice, Derek mentioned, was barely a crack in the rock face, hidden behind stacks of empty crates. It looked too small for a human, let alone a half-shifted wolf. "No, Rhea, you're not leaving him," my logical brain screamed. But Derek's voice, raw with the urgency of a desperate command, echoed louder. "Go! That's an order." I squeezed through the opening, scraping my shoulders and hips against the rough stone. The darkness inside was absolute, thick enough to taste. My hand found the cold rock, guiding me forward. The tunnel was tight, winding, and smelled like forgotten earth and the faint metallic tang of an old mining operation. The sounds of the fight faded behind me, swallowed by the mountain. I was alone, relying on touch and instinct. My sprained ankle throbbed with every step, forcing me into a slow, agonizing shuffle. The heat from my body, that primal fever Derek had called estrus, was still raging, making me lightheaded and disoriented. Every nerve ending felt raw, hypersensitive. Suddenly, the tunnel widened. A faint natural light filtered in from above, revealing a small, damp chamber.
Water dripped from the ceiling, collecting in a shallow pool on the floor. I limped toward it, my throat parched. As I knelt to drink, my reflection stared back at me. My face was pale, streaked with dirt, my eyes wide and dark with fear. But there was something else there too, a fierce determination, a stubborn refusal to break. A low growl echoed from the shadows at the far end of the chamber. I froze, my hand flying to my throat. It wasn't Derek, it was a deep, wild sound, accompanied by the rustle of dry leaves. A pair of glowing yellow eyes emerged from the darkness. Not magical, but the natural reflection of light on the eyes of a real wolf. It was massive, its fur matted and dark, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. It was a wild wolf, drawn by the scent of the fight, the blood, and my own heightened pheromones. It wasn't aggressive, not yet. It was curious, cautious, but its presence was terrifying. I was injured, unarmed, and deeply, viscerally aware that I was no longer at the top of the food chain. I didn't move. I slowly, deliberately picked up a fist-sized rock from the ground, my eyes locked on the wolf's.
Easy, boy, I whispered, my voice rough. I'm just passing through, no trouble. The wolf took another step, its head tilted, sniffing the air. It could smell my fear, yes, but it could also smell the lingering scent of Derek, the Alpha King, on me. It was confused, hesitant. Just as I prepared to throw the rock, a new sound cut through the silence, a distant howl, not the mournful cry from earlier, but a hunting call, and it was getting closer. The wild wolf's ears swiveled. Its gaze shifted from me to the tunnel behind it, then back to me, its yellow eyes narrowing. It had to choose, me, the human female with the confusing scent, or the approaching threat. It let out a frustrated whine, took one last look at me, and then melted back into the shadows from which it came, disappearing into another, even narrower crevice. I slumped against the rock, breathing a shaky sigh of relief. One threat gone, but the approaching howls meant Frank's trackers were closing in, and they weren't interested in just a passing sniff. They wanted blood.
Chapter 15. The Northern Slopes. The wild wolf's escape route proved to be my salvation. The crevice it had disappeared into was even tighter than the first, but I squeezed through, scraping skin and tearing fabric. The air grew colder, drier, carrying the scent of pine needles and crisp mountain wind. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, the tunnel opened abruptly onto a narrow ledge overlooking the northern slopes of the mountain. The sky was still dark, but a faint silver line was appearing on the horizon, the first hint of dawn. The cold hit me like a slap, making my heated skin prickle. I was hundreds of feet up, the forest a dark, undulating blanket below me. My ankle screamed, making descent a terrifying prospect, but the approaching howls of Frank's trackers were getting closer, echoing from the tunnels I had just left. I couldn't stay. I began my descent slowly, awkwardly, using my hands to grip roots and small protrusions in the rock face. Every movement sent jolts of pain through my ankle, but the thought of Frank and his men and the raw, unhinged look in their eyes propelled me forward. I wasn't just running from them, I was running for Derek, for the life he was fighting for, the life I was now inexplicably intertwined with.
Halfway down the slope, my foot slipped on a patch of loose gravel. I cried out, tumbling, my body slamming against the rough ground. I landed hard on my injured ankle, sending a white-hot wave of agony through me. I bit back a scream, struggling to push myself up. My head spun and the world tilted. Suddenly, a massive black shape detached itself from the shadows of the pine trees below. It wasn't human, it was a wolf. A true wolf, larger than any I had ever seen, its fur like polished obsidian. It moved with a terrifying grace, its paws silent on the fallen leaves. It was Derek. He was fully shifted, his primal form a breathtaking, terrifying display of raw power. His head was held low, his eyes dark and intelligent, fixed on me. He didn't approach immediately. He stopped at the base of the slope, watching me.
My breath hitched. The heat in my body, which had been dulled by the cold and the pain, roared back to life with a vengeance. The scent of him, no longer just his human musk, but the full, potent aroma of a dominant alpha wolf, enveloped me. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, making my head swim with a primal urge to surrender.
He let out a low growl, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the earth and up into my chest. It wasn't a threat, it was a demand, a call to his mate. I tried to stand, but my ankle buckled. Tears of frustration and pain welled in my eyes. "I can't," I choked out, my voice raw. "I can't move." Derek took a single powerful bound up the slope. He reached me in an instant, nudging me with his massive head, his soft fur brushing against my arm. He then lowered his body, turning to offer his back. He wanted me to climb on. He wanted to carry me. It was humiliating, surrendering to the beast, but with the sounds of Frank's men beginning to echo from the top of the slope, I had no choice. I hauled myself onto his broad, powerful back, gripping the thick fur of his mane. The warmth radiating from him was immediate, soothing the chill from my bones and the ache in my heart. He rose, his muscles coiling, and then, with another low growl, he launched himself into a full, silent run down the mountain, disappearing into the depths of the forest, the howls of his pursuers growing closer behind us.
Chapter 16. The Silent Hunt. The forest became a blur of dark shapes and rushing wind. Derek ran like the mountain itself, powerful, relentless, and utterly silent. I clung to his fur, my face pressed against the warm, musky scent of his mane. Every bound was smooth, effortless, defying the rugged terrain. My injured ankle surprisingly didn't ache as much as when I wasn't putting weight on it, though the lingering fever from the bond still made my head swim. He didn't speak, of course, but his movements were a language I understood instinctively. He knew this mountain, every hidden trail, every shadowed ravine, every ancient game path. He was taking us deeper, further away from Frank, further away from the human world. We ran for what felt like an eternity. The dawn eventually broke through the thick canopy, painting the forest floor with dappled light. We passed through groves of ancient pines, across icy streams and over moss-covered boulders. There was a raw, undeniable beauty to the wilderness, a savage peace that spoke to something deep within me. Finally, Derek slowed, coming to a halt at the edge of a small, hidden clearing. A gurgling spring flowed into a shallow pool, surrounded by thick, unfamiliar ferns. He lowered his body, nudging me gently until I slid off his back. He shifted then. It wasn't a magical transformation with light or smoke. It was a rapid, brutal process of bones grinding, muscles reshaping, fur receding into skin. He shuddered, collapsing onto his hands and knees for a moment, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The scent of pine and wolf was replaced by the familiar tang of sweat and raw male. When he stood, he was fully human again, though his eyes still held a lingering wildness, and his skin was covered in a thin sheen of sweat. He was naked, of course, his clothes having been shed during the shift. But in that moment, in that hidden clearing, there was no awkwardness, only a profound sense of shared vulnerability. He looked at me, his gaze sweeping over my bruised face and dirty clothes. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just walked over to the spring and began to wash his face, splashing the cold water over his features. "They're still out there," he said, his voice rough. "Frank won't stop until he finds you. He thinks you're the key to breaking me." I limped over to the spring, kneeling beside him. The cold water felt incredible against my hot skin. "He's not wrong," I muttered, splashing water on my face. "Your priority should have been the tunnels, Derek, not me." He stopped washing, his hands still in the water. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "My priority is my mate," he growled, the word heavy with a raw, undeniable possessiveness. "Always." He stood, his naked body a powerful, uncompromising statement of his claim. He pulled a rolled-up bundle of clothes from a waterproof satchel hidden in the roots of a nearby tree, a simple pair of trousers and a dark t-shirt. He dressed quickly, his movements efficient.
"We need to find a higher ground," he said, pulling the shirt over his head. "Somewhere we can see them coming, and somewhere we can wait them out." He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. His skin was warm, firm, and familiar. The bond, that invisible current between us, hummed beneath my skin. "Rhea," he said, his voice softer, more vulnerable than I had ever heard it. "I owe you an apology for forcing you into this, for putting you in danger." I squeezed his hand. "Don't," I said, looking up at him. "You didn't force me. I told the Alpha King to shut up. I knew what I was getting into." He let out a low chuckle, a genuine sound of amusement that eased some of the tension in his shoulders. "That you did, and for that I am eternally grateful." He tugged on my hand, pulling me closer. His eyes softened, a deep, ancient longing swirling in their depths. He leaned in, and I thought he was going to kiss me. I wanted him to kiss me. But then his head snapped up. He pulled me closer, his arm wrapping around my waist, pulling me behind him. His body tensed, radiating a sudden, icy stillness. "He's here," Derek whispered, his voice a low, dangerous growl.
Frank found us. Chapter 17. The Trap is Sprung. Derek pushed me behind a cluster of ancient, gnarled trees, his body forming a solid wall between me and the approaching threat. The air, which had been crisp and clean moments before, was now thick with the acrid scent of fear and the pungent, unmistakable musk of Frank's pack. It was closer than I expected, too close. "Stay down," Derek commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. His eyes, though human again, were locked on the thick tree line, searching for movement. "Don't make a sound." I crouched low, my injured ankle screaming in protest. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew this was coming, but the sheer speed with which Frank had tracked us was terrifying. He was like a bloodhound, relentless and cunning. Suddenly, a flicker of movement. Not one, but 3 figures emerged from the trees, moving with the predatory grace of shifters. They were fully human, dressed in rugged outdoor gear, but their eyes held a feral gleam. One of them, a man with a scarred face, was carrying a coil of thick rope. "Come out, Derek," the scarred man shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Frank knows you're here. He knows you have the human. This is his territory now, Alpha King." Derek didn't respond. He remained utterly still, his breathing shallow, his focus absolute. He was waiting, waiting for the right moment, waiting for Frank to show his hand.
"He thinks he can hide you, does he?" Another tracker jeered, circling the clearing. "He thinks his little mate is worth risking his throne for? Come on, girl, save your alpha the trouble and come out." Their words were meant to bait, meant to break Derek's concentration, but they had the opposite effect. A cold fury began to simmer in my gut. They were calling me a weakness, a vulnerability. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I felt Derek tense beside me. He was getting ready to move, but before he could, a new sound cut through the air, a high-pitched, piercing whine that sounded like a wounded animal. It came from behind us, further up the slope. Derek swore under his breath. "A diversion," he muttered, his jaw tight. "Frank has flankers." Just then, a heavy net dropped from the trees above, falling with surprising speed. It wasn't made of ordinary rope. It was thick, woven with steel wires, designed to trap something large and powerful. It fell directly over Derek, pinning him to the ground. He roared, a sound of pure rage and frustration, as he struggled against the mesh. His muscles bulged, tearing at the steel, but the net held fast, digging into his skin. The shift, which had been so quick and fluid moments before, was impossible now. He was tangled, restrained, caught like a beast in a hunter's trap.
The 3 trackers from the front moved in, their faces splitting into triumphant grins. The scarred man approached Derek, kicking him hard in the ribs. "Looks like the Alpha King is nothing but a snared dog after all," he sneered, pulling a heavy-duty tranquilizer gun from his pack. "Frank wants him alive, for now." My blood ran cold. Trank darts. They wouldn't kill Derek, but they would incapacitate him, leaving him vulnerable to whatever humiliation Frank had planned. I couldn't let that happen. My gaze flickered around the clearing. My eyes landed on a large, jagged rock partially embedded in the earth near the spring. It was heavy,
too heavy for a single, injured human to lift and throw effectively. But I wasn't just a human anymore. I was Derek's mate, and his bond, that raw, primal connection, was a wellspring of untapped strength. I limped toward the rock, my muscles screaming in protest, but the fever in my blood lent me a desperate power. The scarred man was raising the tranquilizer gun, aiming it at Derek's exposed neck. "Hey, puppy!" I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that surprised even myself. "Fetch!" With a Herculean effort, I heaved the massive rock, tearing it from the earth with a groan of straining muscle. I threw it with all my might. It wasn't graceful, but it was powerful. The rock sailed through the air, impacting the scarred man's head with a sickening thud. He dropped to the ground like a stone, the tranquilizer gun clattering against the forest floor. The other two trackers whirled, their eyes wide with shock. They hadn't expected the human female to fight back, let alone with such ferocity. Derek, tangled in the net, looked up at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of awe and fierce pride. "Get out of here, Rhea!" he roared, struggling against the net. "Before they—" But he didn't finish his sentence. A shadow fell over the clearing, a massive, fully shifted wolf, its fur a mangy gray, its teeth long and yellowed, stepped out of the trees. It was Frank, and he was not alone. Behind him, at least a dozen more wolves, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim forest light, emerged silently from the tree line, circling the clearing like vultures. I was trapped, and this time there was no hiding. Chapter 18. The King and the Queen. The clearing felt like it had been plunged into a vacuum. The only sound was the wet, ragged breathing of the wolves circling us, and the metallic scrape of the net as Derek fought to free himself. Frank, in his massive gray wolf form, didn't pounce immediately. He prowled the perimeter, his yellowed eyes fixed on me with a terrifying, intelligent hunger. He was enjoying this, the alpha king in a cage and the king's mate standing alone with nothing but a bruised ego and a sprained ankle. I didn't back down. I stepped over the unconscious tracker, my fingers curling around the cold steel of the tranquilizer gun he'd dropped. I didn't know how to use it, but I knew how to bluff. I leveled the barrel at Frank's snout, my hands remarkably steady despite the adrenaline-fueled tremors racking my limbs. "One more step, Frank, and I'll see how you like being a rug," I spat, my voice echoing with a fierce authority that made the nearest wolves hesitate. Derek let out a raw, guttural roar behind me. With a final violent surge of strength that shredded the skin on his shoulders, he tore through the steel-wired mesh. He didn't shift. He rose as a man, bloody, battered, and utterly lethal. He stepped up beside me, his hand finding the small of my back, his touch like a live wire. "You should have stayed in the city, Frank," Derek said, his voice dropping to a register so low it made the leaves on the ground vibrate. "You thought she was my weakness. You thought she was the tether you could pull to make me crawl."
Derek took the tranquilizer gun from my hand, not to use it, but to toss it aside. He didn't need a weapon. He stepped forward, his bare chest heaving, the scent of the bond now so thick it was practically visible, a shimmering heat haze between us and the pack. "Look at her," Derek commanded, his voice a literal shockwave of alpha dominance. "She didn't run. She didn't hide. She took down your best tracker while I was pinned. You didn't find a victim to use against me. You found the reason I'm going to end you." Frank lunged. It was a blur of gray fur and snapping jaws. Derek didn't flinch. He met the massive wolf head-on, catching Frank by the throat with his bare hands. The impact was sickening, the sound of bone hitting bone. They tumbled back toward the spring, a chaotic storm of man and beast. I didn't stay on the sidelines. Two other wolves moved in to help their leader, but I was faster. I grabbed a heavy branch from the forest floor and swung with every ounce of tactical precision I had. I cracked the first wolf across the muzzle, sending him yelping back into the brush. I wasn't an alpha, but I was a fighter, and in this forest, that was enough. Derek pinned Frank into the shallow water of the spring. His fingers dug into the gray fur of Frank's neck, and for a second, I saw the beast rise fully to the surface of Derek's skin.
He could have killed him. He could have torn the life out of the North Pack then and there. But he stopped. He looked at me, and the red haze in his eyes softened just enough to show the man underneath.
Yield, Derek growled, his voice a physical weight that forced the surrounding wolves to their knees. Frank, pinned and drowning in the very spring that was supposed to be his victory site, let out a choked, submissive whine. One by one, the other wolves tucked their tails and lowered their heads. The coup was over. The hunt had failed. Derek stood, dripping with water and blood, and walked back to me. The silence of the forest returned, but it was different now. It was a respectful, heavy quiet. He stopped in front of me, his breath hitching as he reached out to cup my face. His hands were stained, but his touch was as gentle as a summer breeze. "You told me to shut up," he whispered, a tired, beautiful smirk tugging at his lips. "And I'll tell you again if you keep acting like I need a babysitter," I replied, a small laugh breaking through my exhaustion. He pulled me into him, crushing his lips to mine in a kiss that tasted of victory, an ancient, undeniable belonging. The fever of the bond finally settled, not into a frantic fire, but a steady, glowing warmth. We weren't just a king and a trainer anymore. We were a pack of two. As the sun fully crested the mountain, illuminating the clearing in a wash of gold, Derek turned to his defeated rivals and then back to the path leading home. He didn't have to say a word. The Alpha King had found his queen, and the mountain finally knew its true masters.
And that concludes this chapter of our journey. If Derek and Rhea's story left you breathless, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It's the best way to help our pack grow. Don't forget to check the pinned comment to see if you correctly guessed where your fellow listeners are tuning in from. Stay fierce, stay zesty. Z.